Hola, buenos días. Casi buenas tardes.
Good morning,
Primera,
nearly good afternoon.
primera cosa es que como lo ha dicho
The
Llorens,
first thing I'd like to say is that, to
cosas
echo
volcánicas,
Llorens, we are always learning
justamente
about
con
volcanoes.
la cocina y el arte, porque al final ha
And
sido
we
arte
learn
justamente
in the
antes.
culinary arts, but we learn in the arts in general. And
No
cooking
solamente
is
es
an
la
art.
ciencia de la volcanología,
And
sino
it's not
al final
just
todo un mundo, un espíritu
volcanology and the
de
science
volcánica, de
involved,
los
but there's
ecosistemas
the entire
volcánicos.
spirit that revolves
Cuando se
around
habla de
volcanic
volcanes
ecosystems. And when we
o
talk
de
about
ecosistemas
volcanoes
volcánicos,
or
volcánicas,
volcanic ecosystems,
hay dos imágenes.
there are
Hay un
two
poco de miedo, un poco de belleza, y al
images, one
final
that strikes fear
el
into our
volcán
hearts and
crea
one that
vida,
allows
pero
us to
también
appreciate
la puede
beauty. First,
destruir.
that
Es
volcanoes
como si fuera al
bring
final
life,
los
but
dos
volcanoes can also
poderes de la tierra,
destroy.
el mal.
Much like yin and yang, the
Hace más
two
de 20 años que
opposing
trabajo en el mundo de los
forces
volcanes
of this
y hace
planet.
3 años
So I've been working on
decidí
volcanoes for
crear
the
la
last 20 years, and 3 years ago I
Active
decided to
Foundation.
create the Volcano Active Foundation.
Hemos puesto demasiado punto, pero y realmente entonces hace 3 años que
So,
empecé
as I was saying, I set up
para
my
realmente
foundation 3 years ago.
preservar
Why
los
did I do this? Well, because I
ecosistemas,
think
para
that we
estudiarlos,
really need to
para que
preserve
seamos
ecosystems,
más
we need to
conscientes
study
de
them,
nuestro
we need
entorno.
to
Uno de
raise
los
awareness of our
maestros de
surroundings.
Simone Veil,
Simone
una
Veil,
filósofa francesa, lo siento,
a
es que mi español no
French
está
philosopher. I do
decía que
apologize for
trabajar
stumbling
en la
over my words. My Spanish
percepción del
isn't
mundo
perfect,
para
but she said
ser
that we have to work on our perceptions of the
si
world
estamos
to be
conscientes,
fair.
podemos mejorar
And if
nuestra
we
calidad de
are
vida.
fully aware, we can improve our quality of life.
Es un ejemplo. Vivir
Eat
mejor
better,
y
a
también
great
salvar
example here,
vidas.
live better,
El
and
símbolo de
save
la fundación
lives. And the symbol,
es
therefore, of
la
our
huella
foundation
que
is
dejan los volcanes.
the
La huella
imprint
que dejan
of
en nuestra vida,
volcanoes, the
nuestra
imprint that
historia,
volcanoes leave
nuestros
on our lives, our
la tierra,
histories, the
el
products of
medio
the land, the
naturaleza, la
environment,
geología.
nature, geology.
Y en 2021,
And
después un año
then
complicadísimo, muy complicada,
2021, after an extremely
hemos
difficult year
entrado en
for
el
all,
Pacto Mundial de la ONU.
we began with the UN Global
Esto ha sido algo
Convention.
importante porque los volcanes y los ecosistemas
And this is a very
volcánicos
important
ahora están
aspect
reconocidos a otro
because
nivel.
volcanic ecosystems are now recognized
No
on an entirely
solamente,
different level.
no solamente científico,
Not
sino
only on
de la
the
gente,
scientific
pero a un
level
nivel
by
que
people in general, but
podemos
now
a veces
at
hacer
a
cuidado.
new level
No somos
where we
conscientes del
can
impacto de los
be
volcanes. Nos hemos
or bring
olvidado
about a
de
greater awareness of the impact of
de este impacto.
volcanoes.
¿Por qué? Porque
And we
hace más de
forget about the
200
impact of
años al
volcanoes.
final,
Why?
o
Because
un poquito más, el doctor Joan Martí
it's
lo
been
decía ayer,
more than 200 years since the last significant volcanic
la
eruption.
última
Joan
gran
Martí spoke
erupción
about this last year. The
que hemos
last
tenido, que ha
major
impactado al
eruption
final a nivel global,
that had a
ha sido
global
el Monte Tambora en
impact was the Mount
1815.
Tambora
Entonces,
eruption in
desde más de
1815,
200 años
which
no
means that
hemos vivido una erupción
for more than
que
200
tiene un
years,
impacto
we
global.
have not had a volcanic
Y a cada
eruption with
problema
a
hay
global
solución, pero
impact.
para encontrar soluciones hay que ser
Now, problems
consciente
have
de lo que
solutions,
ocurre.
but to find
Y
those
ahí
solutions, we
estamos.
must be aware of the
Antes de
problems.
empezar, me gustaría
That's where
hacer
we need
solamente preguntas
to
sencillas.
begin. So, I'd like to
¿Dónde viene el magma?
open up by asking
Porque hay
some simple
volcanes
questions.
que
Where does
no
magma
tienen la
come from?
forma clásica de un
Why
volcán,
other
que parece
volcanoes do not
al
have the
final
classic
volcanes
volcano
planos, como
shape?
una crepe.
We have
Entonces,
flat
podemos ser
volcanoes, like a
conscientes que
pancake.
vivimos en una zona volcánica porque
And
la forma
in this case, we're not aware that we live in a volcanic
del
zone
volcán no es
because
como
the
el Monte
classic
Fuji
volcano
en
shape
Japón.
is not
Es un
what we're
volcán.
seeing. It's
Vale.
not like Mount Fuji
Porque
in
los volcanes
Japan. Why do we have these
tienen las
pancake
tierras más
flat
fértiles del
volcanoes?
mundo. Al final
Why
es
do
la huella
volcanoes
del
have the
volcán.
most fertile soils on this
Porque en
planet?
cada
That is
zona
another good
hay
question
especies
worth asking.
endémicas.
And
Porque el
in
café
volcanic zones, we have
costariano es
endemic species.
igual que el
Why
café
is the
en
cafe
Ruanda o
in
en
Rwanda
Etiopía? Porque
different from
Etiopía
the
es el primero
coffee
país de
in
África con más de
Ethiopia?
67
Well,
volcanes.
Rwanda has more than 67
Ayer
volcanoes,
el
the
chef
greatest
de
number in
Chile
Africa.
y Viviana hablaban
Now, Chile
de productos
And Viviana yesterday spoke about endemic
Entonces, quiere decir que
species.
cada volcán hay un producto donde los
And
chefs van a hacer
it is
una
true
que tiene
that
algo muy
each
especial.
volcano
¿Por
has
qué?
a unique plant species,
En
and
Hawái,
chefs can
ayer
seek these out.
tuvimos
And in fact, we heard about Hawaii yesterday.
un chef que nos ha
We had
hecho algo muy fuerte a
a
nivel
chef
cultural.
from Hawaii
Hay que saber
who
que en
spoke
Hawái,
about the
en la isla de
cultural
Maui, hay una flor
meanings on the island
que
of
se llama silverhoots,
Hawaii. There's a flower called silverhood.
Alea cala, seguramente que él lo puede
Alia
pronunciar mejor.
Kala is its Hawaiian name. I'm sure he can pronounce it much better than I can. But this blooms every 90 years, and then it simply dies. And this is an endemic species. So these are pressing questions. These are questions that I think we need to be able to supply answers to. And if we do, we're going to raise awareness about the world of volcanoes in general.
Entonces, rápidamente, yo tengo un título de
So,
gestión
very
de
briefly,
riesgo y desastre
I work
de
on disaster
y
recovery
tengo el honor de ser
at the
la
United Nations.
del profesor Marcel Leroux.
I was a student of Professor Marcel Roux,
Como se puede decir, una visión muy específica
and
del medio ambiente.
this professor had a very specific vision of the environment. And
Gérard
Gérard Motel was another professor of mine, the director of the geophysics laboratory at Lyon 3 University. Next slide, please. So, awareness of volcanoes. There are 1,500 active volcanoes on land across this planet. Now, I say on land, this means that there are also more volcanoes in our oceans. And Shino spoke about this yesterday, that next to Costa Rica, there are submarine volcanoes on which we have no information. In fact, there are more undersea volcanoes than there are on land. And we can, therefore, forecast and predict volcanic risk, but we need to have the right tools. We need to be able to study these volcanoes. We need the right kind of equipment and tools. 60% of active volcanoes have no active qualitative and quantitative monitoring systems in place. This, I think, is a very relevant fact. Next slide. Another example of our lack of awareness about volcanoes is that in 2017, they discovered 91 volcanoes in Antarctica, under the Antarctic ice sheet. And if you take a look at the Lyon 2 University website, you can see all of the studies that have been conducted on all of these volcanoes. I think at present only 42 of these have been fully identified. But this is the first map on the left, which is in French. You can see the thermal flow mapping of this area of the world. Another example of our lack of awareness on volcanoes in the world is, as you can see on this slide, this is a link from a civil protection website in Italy. The yellow circle on the right-hand side is Mount Vesuvius. And we heard about Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius yesterday. Alongside this, there is a red circle. You can see this dotted line. It's a larger circle, and this is the Pompeii volcano. And as you can see from the image, this is a much larger volcano than Vesuvius. This is an active volcano, Pompeii volcano. And below you can see two screen grabs from the civil protection website in Italy, and what they have done is a simulation exercise. What would happen if this volcano erupted? Pompeii volcano. There are 11 active volcanoes in Italy. So let's return, therefore, to our question. Where does magma come from? When we give talks to children, they often say it comes from the core of the Earth. No, it's entirely logical, but no. Magma doesn't come from the center of the Earth, because the temperatures and pressure are so high that the melting point cannot occur. In fact, magma is created 100 kilometers below our feet. So magma is created 100 kilometers below our feet, where rock melting point occurs. So Barcelona to Olot, Barcelona to Girona, to give you an example of the distances involved. And I don't think we are fully aware of this. And where does all this magma flow to the surface? No. It comes up through cracks, fissures, through the points of least resistance in the Earth. And these are the gaps between the tectonic plates. So if you look at the map, you can see the geographical aspects of volcanic activity. John Marti spoke of this, and Gino also explained this yesterday. But sometimes there is a fault line within the tectonic plates, and this is when we see volcanoes erupting, and the classic example of this is the Hawaiian volcanic hotspot. So what is happening under our feet, and why is each and every volcano different? Why is the earth around these volcanoes so fertile, and why are the characteristics so varying? So why is every volcano different? And why are there some volcanoes do not take the same shape as Mount Fuji, or the classic volcano shape? And this is a very interesting slide, and it calls to mind a bottle of champagne. If you look at this slide, it reproduces this classic champagne bottle shape. But also, the volcano can collapse in upon itself. The open, pancake-shaped volcano. And also, to help understand that the magma is different in different volcanoes, we can see the migration of magma on the slide. On Mount Etna, in the natural park around Mount Etna, there is a natural risk there. And the idea is that there's a lift type system for each and every volcano. So the lift stops at ground floor, and then this lift will climb floor by floor up the volcanic building, the volcanic edifice. And the magma, when it reaches the surface, is lava, and as the magma rises up the building on this lift, it makes it to the first floor, the second floor. Sometimes it stops a while on the third floor because many people are entering the lift. Then once all of these people have entered the lift is ready to keep rising up the edifice, the volcanic edifice, the building, until it makes it up to the top floor of the building or the volcanic edifice. And you can see how the magma chambers transform over time. And time can vary as well. We have other examples as well. I come from a region where we sometimes make fondues and we add cheese to the pot. We sometimes add wild mushrooms to the fondue. And much like our fondue pot, we can draw the analogy between this and the magma chamber. Each and every person makes their own version of fondue. Some add different cheeses, different ingredients, and you can see that each magma chamber, by analogy, is like this pot. It's like a cauldron. In number 2, for example, we can see that there's been injection of new magma. In the third pot, we can see a crystallization at the bottom. And all of this changes the composition of the magma, and the magma, therefore, that rises to the surface will be different for each individual volcano, and the soils around each volcano will have their own geological identity. And as we heard from Chef Chele, who spoke about the endemic characteristics of his cooking, Viviana also uses endemic almonds in her cooking, native species that are not found anywhere else in the world. So, to give you a very brief overview, we often speak of the perfect volcano shape, and also I've explained to you how many volcanoes can also be pancake flat. And volcanoes are not always formed through the same mechanisms. So we might have a volcano with this type of lava flow, we might have different volcanoes with different characteristics, but let's break them down into main families, the effusive and explosive volcanoes. Some produce more gas and some that produce less gas. And we can break them down by calling them red volcanoes and gray volcanoes, which I think makes it easier for us to understand. Gray volcanoes are cooler, but they're much more explosive, as we saw yesterday with Jean-Baptiste's photos, the Monte Cetalona and Pinatubo as well. These are very destructive volcanic eruptions. And the volcanic eruption in Colombia that killed 6,000 people. And then we have the other family, the effusive volcanoes, where the lava is much more fluid, less viscous, and they're much less explosive than the gray family of volcanoes. So this helps us in our mapping exercise. First of all, the fact that volcanoes do not have the perfect volcanic shape, and also they don't all have the same mechanisms. These volcanic products, we saw this yesterday, so I think I can swiftly skip through that slide. And I do often say that we're not fully aware of the world of volcanoes. And therefore we need more tools to understand volcanoes. And sometimes we need to apply basic mathematical principles, because these are principles of science. How many times does a phenomenon repeat, to start with? As I've already said, we have not seen a major global eruption for 200 years. And we've already heard about historical records of volcanoes, or our memory, our living memory of volcanoes. We have the memories of our grandparents. And we can go even beyond that. And then in current generations, people quite simply are not aware that volcanoes might erupt. So we look at the volcanic recurrence index. Volcano 6 or 7 on the scale is a volcanic eruption that could occur every certain period. For example, the Mount Tambora eruption in 1816, also in 1816 in Spain and in Europe. was called a summerless summer in Europe, because Tambora released a 35-kilometer high column of smoke and ash, spewing all of these particles into the atmosphere, which shielded the planet against the sun. And this led to a cooling of the planet over a period of a year and a half, between 1 and 2 degrees cooling on the planet because of this volcanic eruption. And in the case of this type of eruption, there's nothing we can do to prevent it. We cannot simply stick a cork in the crater and stop it from erupting. But we can mitigate the effects so that we are less vulnerable. We can act through education efforts, through mitigation programs, and if we do so, we will become more resilient. And to help us understand this a little bit better, we all know what happened with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and what happened to Pompeii. No, but this is, you can see the little circle, that's the impact of Vesuvius on Pompeii. And yesterday we spoke about Toba. And you can see the scale of that eruption, and this enables us to better understand the scale. I'm talking about enormous dimensions. There's a huge difference between Toba and Vesuvius, as you can see from the slide. The Icelandic volcano, well, with the Icelandic chef in the room, I wouldn't even dare try to pronounce that name. But with the eruption in 2017, all of air traffic was stopped immediately because of the ash in the air. But you can see that it was tiny compared to other eruptions in the past. Now, on this slide, we have a very clear example of the effects of a volcano. We have the eruption at the outset, and then we can see all of the collateral impact, tsunami, impact on the economy, climate change. And at the beginning, I mentioned that we have now the UN Global Compact, and over the last 10 years they have been talking about the fact that natural disasters don't exist. This is quite a key message. What does that mean, natural disasters don't exist? Well, it is a natural threat, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, and we think that there's nothing we can do about it. But we have natural threats. But we don't necessarily have to be that much more vulnerable. We can educate, we can monitor, we can mitigate. Vulnerability factors include poverty, the urban growth and urban spread, lack of education, corruption. But if we study these factors and reduce these factors, then we can become more resilient and less vulnerable. And that's why we set up the Volcano Active Foundation and work on 3 main areas. The first area is give support to local scientists. We can provide them with materials, with training, and we can reach out to scientists across the world and help them by training them. In Costa Rica, for example, they have learned a great deal about the volcanoes in Goma, in Olot, in Rwanda, Italy. And by cooperating and working together, we can all feed in together to developing greater knowledge and greater awareness in the long run. This is an important part of the work that we're doing. And also, when a volcano does erupt, if we are to be efficient, then we're going to have to work together as a team. That's going to help us save lives. And this seen that there has been an eruption on the island of La Palma, and if we look at kids, they can't save their PlayStation. But what they can save, what they can rescue from a volcanic eruption is ourselves, our modus operandi, our being, the way we are. And I think that these are values that we need to appreciate. And I think these are values that we have spoken at length about in this conference. Mutual support, help, the values of our Earth, of our planet. And these are values that are repeated across the world. There are endemic species on different volcanoes. And I think that there are important aspects that we need to work on together. We also have a Volcano school program. That's the second area that we're working on. And in fact, we work with Gino a lot on this initiative because we are fully of the conviction that we need to educate the younger generations about volcanic risk. And we have this program, we have the Volcano School, and we go to areas where there is no volcanic risk, where we talk to children about food, culinary traditions, legends about volcanoes. The volcano in Mexico, for example. And there's a legend about two people that fell in love and they were turned into volcanoes. And when one volcano talks to the other volcano, there is a dialogue between these volcanoes, and this is a story, a tale that we tell to these children. So there is cultural cooperation aspects, know-how and development and the sharing of knowledge. And then there are other volcanic areas where we work more on prevention aspects. What do we need to do to prevent risks? Am I okay for time? And if you can go back to the previous slide, at the Volcano School in Rwanda or in Goma or other regions, we've seen that there are recurrent problems, serious problems. That children 8 and under, when there's a seismic movement to an earthquake, they panic because schools have to be evacuated and they need their parents to help them. And in some areas, it's impossible to hand these children back to their parents because we cannot simply trace their parents because of the local conditions. So we saw a situation 36 years ago. And we've also seen the case of adoption of children on 26th of May as well. Many children were lost after one of these incidents. We quite simply couldn't trace them. So the next great challenge for a foundation is to set up an international protocol for miners in situations of eruption. And we've also spoken to others who are preparing programs for eruptions and earthquakes. The third area is the preservation of our biodiversity. We've seen that there are endemic species. We have endemic flora and fauna in volcanic regions. We must conserve these species because we have an intangible cultural heritage in these regions as well. We have rituals, musical traditions. We've heard about volcanic cooking traditions, but there are musical traditions as well. There are specific musical instruments, very special musical instruments, and these reflect the spirit of the volcano. And these are traditions that must be preserved. So I do apologize for my heavily French-inflected Spanish, but I hope that I've been able to convey my message, and I hope that you've all been able to learn. Thank you very much.